Hey, Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Shalom. Give all our honor, all praises, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Akakwadash. Double honors the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathim and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Araquai, back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to kind of just take a step back and discuss this turmoil between America and the EU nations, and look at it from the perspective of friends and enemies, friends, enemies, adversity, so on and so forth, right? Because this is a very, very interesting relationship. This is a very, very important portion of prophecy of what's playing out here, and I want to get that later on. But I wanted to discuss it from an angle, in regards to this relationship as seeming like friends on paper, seeming like friends, air quotes, I'm saying it like that, but they're now realizing, this horror that they're carrying, which represents America. When you read about the judgment of the great whore that sits upon many waters, going back to Revelation, the 17th chapter, it's essentially what's going on here. The other nations are going to start to notice that this is actually an enemy and not entirely, and not a really a true friend, right? So I wanted to read some precepts in regards to what a friend is, and he's going to start to realize that America doesn't essentially fit that mold of what a real, what a friend really is, and they're going to start to be more of an enemy. And I say that in the eyes of the perspective as the other nations are seeing America now, right? And this is not like a I don't want to say, how do I say it? This is not a, I guess, a one-time thing, right? This is essentially, yes, it's a prophecy, but at the same time, it's also it's a build-up. It's a build-up process as to why they have this strong dislike and this strong hatred towards the whore, right? So I wanted to read a couple things here and there in the Apocrypha. Let me get, actually, first I'm gonna get what a friend is in the etymology. And excuse me. And it says here, a friend is one attached to another by feelings of personal regard and preference. It says friend, it says a loving, it says what else does it say here? There's more. Okay, so it says to join in friendship, to be friends. Let's see. So what really sticks out here is join, right? So we know that this relationship there is a joint agreement between America and these other EU nations, right? So they have essentially an agreement, so to speak, essentially to protect themselves against Russian aggression, even going back as far back as the Cold War eras, right? That was pretty much the inception of NATO. And when you think about NATO, because I think it was formed after the war ended. So after World War II ended, I believe it was 1949, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just double check that. I believe it was 1949. Let me just double check just to make sure. Okay, so April 4th, 1949 Washington, D.C., United States, right? So it was just a quick um, uh, short synopsis here. It says the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was created in 1949 by the United States, Canada, and several Western European nations to provide collective security against the Soviet Union, right? So you had, after the war ended, you had certain other, like certain Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, um, Estonia, East Germany. So you had essentially certain nations that were actually originally a part of that Soviet Union, and that include Russia, right? So there was an agreement, right? They had some kind of joint form of partnership. So they were more, when I say that, I'm kind of equating that to, in terms of that friend scenario as I was speaking of, right? But now we're starting to see we're living in a time where there is a withering away of that friendship. There is a withering away of that agreement. There is a withering away of that, that relationship. It's not as, it's not as smooth, and it's not as what's the word I'm looking for? It's not as, as close as it used to be because of recent events going on with Venezuela, going on with Greenland, and other nations, whether, specifically within the EU, are having, again, us that distaste towards the whore that's mentioned in Revelation 17, right? So I'm reading this, but I'm kind of using the concept of friends to understand what's actually going on here and why these other nations are having this strong distaste towards America, right? I guess I'll start. Let me see. Hold on. I want to go to Jeremiah 50. And then I'll kind of get some precepts in regards to like understanding what's going on as a friend, from a friend perspective. So let me read something here in Jeremiah, just for understanding. So this is Jeremiah 50, verse 12, and it says, "Your mother shall be sore confounded, and she shall bear you, shall be ashamed. Behold, um, the hindermost of the nations shall be a wilderness, a dry land, and a desert," right? So that mother, refers to Great Britain, right? Because America, broke off from this one country here, and they established their own nation July 4th in 1776, right? So the this particular nation here has had a strong shameful sort of attitude towards America, right? The lewdness, their behavior, their quality in education, is strongly, when you compare the two countries, they're very, very they tend the Great Britain tends to have a little bit more of class, and America just seems to be a very classless society, right? And what also proves this as well, and I was discussing this with last week, there is that a shameful attitude, because when Britain, looks at America's actions. So I use the example of Grenada back in 1983. The U.S. under President Ronald Reagan, they went into this small island, and essentially, their actions were not seen as favorable on the international and on the world stage, right? And now we're starting to see that this aggression between the U.S. and Greenland, the U.S. with Venezuela, they're starting to, the Prime Minister of Great Britain currently, he is seeing that those American actions, those actions being done by Trump, they're seen as shameful. They're seen as like, my goodness, this is, what I'm saying? Like, he's having a sort of, distasteful attitude towards his actions, because now he's coming out and he's even saying very boastful things about, he doesn't regard the importance of international law, right? So there's a sort of a prideful attitude towards what Trump is actually, conveying, or actually thinking about the repercussions thereof, right? So this is why Great Britain has that sort of distaste and that sort of a shameful, that they don't actually regard America, like they're trying to remain that peaceful way, because of that relationship, because of that friendship, you know but at the same time they're having they're having that distasteful attitude towards America, right? So I wanted to get something in regards to friends here. So this is I'm sorry, this is Ecclesiasticus 12, and I'll read verse 8. And it says, a friend cannot be known in prosperity, and an enemy cannot be hidden in adversity. So now the other nations, when I say the other nations, I'm speaking about like these other EU nations. They're experiencing adversity, and they're realizing that they're that nation, that America here is really and truly more of an enemy rather than an actual friend, right? They're experiencing some distaste towards their actions. They're realizing, okay, if we're on the same team, why isn't there some level of cohesion? Why isn't there some level of like, okay, we're on the same mind frame? But that's not the case. That's not the case. That's not the Lord's will, because the scriptures talk about how the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, right? And as the rivers turneth, he turneth their minds whithersoever he will, to roughly paraphrase. So the mindset is to basically have the EU nations, have a strong distaste towards towards America, right? And I want to get that later on, but I kind of wanted to read through this and get an understanding of, from the perspective of friendship here, and it's seen that friendship is slowly, it's starting to see that it's withering away to the point it's going to come to nuclear conflict, right? So I wanted to read something here. This is I wanted to go to, where is it? One second. GNT. Let me just go to Sirach. Let me just read this here. Okay, this is this chapter kind of goes into like the nature of friends, and this is Sirach chapter 6 verse 8 in the GNT, and it says, some people will be your friends only when it's convenient for them, but they won't stand by you in trouble. Others will fall out with you over some argument and be embarrassed, then embarrass you by letting everyone know about it. Others will sit at your table as long as things are going well, right? So, again, going back, I'm just using this to understand, that relationship between the EU nations and America, right? They're sitting at the table, things are going well, right? And here's the attitude, they will stick to you like a shadow that give orders to your servants, but they will not stand by you in trouble, right? So America is not actually standing, by these EU nations. There's a strong divide here that's going on, right? And the scriptures talk about, I think Yahushua said this, a kingdom that is divided itself, it can't stand, right? So we're starting to see there's a lot of division here, and the division is essentially increasing, right? So let me go back. I want to get this, one second. Go here. This is Sirach 22, verse 22, and it says, "If thou hast opened thy mouth against thy friend, fear not, for there may be a reconciliation, except for upbraiding or pride or disclosing of secrets or a treacherous wound. For these things even a friend will depart." Let me get that in the GNT. One second. I want to see how that's worded in the GNT. Because America is showing themselves to be very, very prideful. They're showing themselves to be that, that nation where they essentially can be there. There's no counter force to actually check their behaviors and their attitudes, right? So let me just get this in the GNT here to see. So this is that's interesting. There's no 22nd verse. Okay, I'll read verse 21, and it says, "Even if you have a violent argument with a friend and speak sharply, all is not lost. You can still make up with him, but a friend will leave you if you insult him." To take this in, and take in Trump's actions when you go through this, right? If but any friend will leave you if you insult him, if you are arrogant, if you reveal his secrets, or if you turn on him expectedly. So remember, taking Trump's actions to the way he relates with the EU nations. He's very prideful. He's very arrogant. There's been times and times again. I forgot who it was that reprimanded him in regards to the way you spoke to the other nations. I believe it was one of the secretary generals. I don't remember his name, but I remember there was an article that came out in regards to the way Trump spoke to some of the delegates of these other nations. And because he's so, it's America, and America likes to boast themselves as to be that that top nation. They have the highest military budget, so essentially they're the nation that has like a chip on their shoulder, right? They don't feel the need to actually have and convey a certain level of respect for their other delegates, right? And when you see these small snippets of disrespect, of being arrogant, of being prideful, it's all to actually fuel the prophecy of that hatred. I want to get that in a second, but I'm just just explaining these small snippets of what's actually occurring here, to actually to see that this nation is going to have some serious repercussions. And the scriptures talk about how not to as a matter of fact, let me get it let not a nation, let not a rich man boast in his riches. This is Jeremiah 9:23, and it says, "Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, let not a wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let a mighty man glory in his might. Let not a rich man glory in his riches." And this is the vibe that America has towards their counterparts, right? No, pretty much the entire world stage, right? So they have the mindset, okay, there's only me, there's no one else beside me, no one can check me, like, think about it as, and you think about it, it really reminds you of a lot of these women too. That same sort of attitude, that no one can check them until somebody does check them, right? And then the interesting is one of the consequences of, like, for example, when you go into the law, one of the consequences of the judgment for a whore, is fire, right? So it's no coincidence, right? And what is America's judgment? It's fire, right? Via these nuclear missiles. So I'm going to okay, so let me get the prophecy. Let me see. This is Revelation 17, verse 16, and it says, "And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore." So they will have a strong distaste for America, and they shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For the Most High have put in their hearts to fulfill his will. So this is the Lord's will of what's actually occurring upon the planet. And it says, "And to agree and to give their kingdom unto the beast until the words of the Most High shall be fulfilled," right? So this is the judgment of the whore, right? And we're starting to see that playing out, and it's that withering away of that friendship. It's if it's now if it's operating very, very well, it's gonna get worse, right? That hatred is going to essentially increase, where their own enemies, their own allies, I should say, are going to turn into enemies, right? They're going to turn on enemies and become enemies of the of America, right? So this is what you're seeing playing out here, right? So I just thought I would discuss this from the perspective of, like, friends, because they started out actually having these different agreements going back as far back 50, 60, 70 years ago, through their different endeavors in trying to actually maintain a certain level of Western allegiance, protecting against Soviet aggression, right? But eventually the Soviet Union fell, all these different countries were created, but that hatred for that whore was still there, because that's still part of the Lord's will to fulfill, right? What's that? Second Ezra. Let me see. This is Second Ezra 4, verse 37, and it says, "By measure hath he measured the times, and by number hath he numbered the times, and doth not move nor stir them until the set measure be fulfilled." And all these things are, being fulfilled, in front of our eyes, right? So, anyways, I just thought I would just, discuss this, from the perspective of friendship and the withering away of that friendship, and how that's going to, the judgment thereof for America. That's what's going to befall them, for the way that they're behaving. But all of this is really and truly the Lord's will at work here. So, hopefully, this lesson, was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.